9/11 attacks. He was among scores of Muslims who died, among the close to 3,000 people who died. We're also joined by Rabbi Irwin Kula, who's president of the National Jewish Center for Leadership and Learning and Leadership. John Esposito is with us, professor of Islamic Studies at Georgetown University, and Congressman Keith Ellison, Democrat from Minnesota, the first Muslim elected to Congress. I'm Amy Goodman with Anjali Kamat. Anjali?
Congressman Ellison, I want to go to you. Why are you supporting the Park 51 project? And what is your reaction to the opposition to the project from Democrats, most prominently Harry Reid?
I have three basic reasons why I think that this is a project that has merit and should move forward. First of all, by supporting this project, we directly undermine and counteract the narrative of the transnational terrorists who claim that America is at war with Islam. America is not at war with Islam. And all we have to do to demonstrate that is to stand on our Constitution, which guarantees the freedom of worship for all Americans. So the fact is that while Anwar al-Awlaki and other people like that are trying to argue that the United States is against Islam, America has a constitution and hopefully a majority of its population which still believes in religious freedom and tolerance. And so that is the first reason. Second reason is that it's the constitutional right of all Americans to worship as they see fit. And if this project is turned back, it will embolden elements not only in New York, but all over the country that are trying to stop mosques literally all over the country. Now, of course, this is not a mosque. But the fact is that Muslims from New York and Sheepshead Bay, including that, and other places in Kentucky, places in Michigan, places in Wisconsin, there's these local elements who are fearful about what Muslims represent in this country and are trying to stop them from freedom of worship. And then, of course, the third reason is the reason that is the very founding of this country. I mean, every school kid knows that when the Pilgrims came to the United States, well, what is now the United States, and landed on Plymouth Rock, it was because they were being persecuted from freedom of practice of their religion. And so the very root elements of this country are in freedom of faith. And I'm worried that as we see in Europe, minarets being banned, we see hijabs being banned, that this is a pernicious development, and we should hold fast to our heritage of religious tolerance in the United States. Now, what do I think of my fellow Democrats? Unfortunately, I think that some of them are in some tight races. Their opponents have made this into a divisive wedge issue, and they blinked on the Constitution. Because they're afraid of their prospects in November. But I just want to tell any Democrat that, look, you standing on religious tolerance and freedom is going to be a winning election issue because this resonates with Americans.
Well, let me ask you about President Obama. He made a strong statement on Friday night at dinner, breaking the fast, the Ramadan. Were you there, Congressman Ellison?
The iftar.
At iftar. Were you there?
No, I was on the opposite end of the country with Nancy Pelosi. I was not with the president, but I'd been there every year except this one, but I had other obligations that night. But I was aware of the speech, and I was very proud of the president. So
I wanted to ask what you thought the next day, which surprised many, when this was his response to a follow-up question.
I was not commenting, and I will not comment on the wisdom of making a decision to put a mosque there. I was commenting very specifically on the right that people have that dates back to our founding. That's what our country is about.
Many people saw this as President Obama backtracking. Congressman Ellison, your response.
Well, I don't think those people are correct. I think no president, no congressman should be urging or trying to advocate for the erection of a religious institution or the defeat of the building of that same institution. It's our job to protect people's rights. It's not our job to tell people where to put a synagogue or where to put a Buddhist temple or where to put a church or a mosque. The president's correct. He should not be in the business of advocating the construction of a religious institution. What he should be doing is saying that everybody has a right to pursue their rights and that he's going to uphold and defend the Constitution, which means he's going to guarantee their right to do it. And that includes not creating a hostile atmosphere so that people are afraid or inhibited or chilled from exercising their rights, as politicians like Peter King and many others have done. But so I don't think the president's wrong.
Rabbi Irwin Kula, you wanted to interject?
Yeah. I understand what Keith is saying, and the president has to be careful, and the politics of this are so outlandish. But I actually think the distinction between the right to build and the wisdom to build is a very, very, very dangerous distinction. It actually is pernicious in a way. And I would have liked the president to say something like this: I reject the premises of the question, because I know where that question's coming from. That question is coming from already a premise that there are these terrorists and these American Muslims, and they're equivalent. And therefore, you're asking me about the wisdom of American Muslims who have been in New York for a long time in a mosque that was within 12 blocks for the last 27 years. And the very fact of the question of the wisdom is actually to presume suspicion. And so I reject the question. There's only one wisdom I care about. The wisdom of the Constitution I care about, and the wisdom of distinguishing between our genuine enemies and American citizens.
Well, Rabbi Kula, let me ask you about the statement of the Anti-Defamation League. It published a statement opposing the Park 51 project, saying, quote, ultimately, this is not a question of rights, but a question of what is right. In our judgment, they said, building an Islamic center in the shadow of the World Trade Center will cause some victims more pain unnecessarily, and that is not right. The ADL National Director, Abraham Foxman, later defended this position on CNN.
Our position basically was an appeal to the Imam and his supporters. If you want to heal, if you want to reconcile, is this the best place to do it? Should you do it in the face of those who are saying to you, most of the victims, families of the victims, the responders, are saying, please don't do it here. Please don't do it in our cemetery. I believe on this issue, the voices, the feelings, the emotions of the families of the victims, of the responders, I think take precedent maybe over even the mayors.
That was Abe Foxman, head of the Anti-Defamation League. Rabbi Kula, your response?
I was deeply disappointed, and I was, quoted as saying, I think the ADL should be ashamed of itself. I think the sad thing here is that Abe Foxman, since 9/11, has been one of the most important advocates to ensure that there was not defamation and not prejudice for Muslims. And the shame here is that he actually knows Daisy and knows Imam Faisal for a long time. And so I think what we really have here is tremendous political pressure.
And Daisy is Daisy Khan, the wife of Imam.
The wife of Imam Faisal, Abdul Rauf. And what we have here is tremendous political pressure. And I'm sure the stories are going to come out in the next months of the kinds of pressures that were put on somebody like Abe. And you can see the torturous kinds of statement that he had to make about the feelings, the anguish. And I think we need to say something, that the anguish of people and does not automatically translate into public policy. And sometimes anguish and really, really personal suffering needs to be disconnected from public policy, because anguish doesn't allow us to abandon rationality. Anguish doesn't allow us to abandon kind of first principles about what a country stands for. And I had two friends who died in the World Trade Center, very involved in this for a long time. And to be able to use the sensitivities of people to really stoke fear, there's something very cynical about that. And there isn't such thing as the sensitivities of 9/11 families. There are a lot of different 9/11 families. And there are not only 9/11 families who lost directly people, but there are 9/11 families who were forced out of their homes for years in the neighborhood. So what do we mean by the feelings of 9/11 families? These are abstractions used to actually stoke fear in the country.
Let me ask you about Imam Rauf, Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf, who is headed, by the way, on a State Department mission for 2 weeks to the Middle East this week, who worked for President Bush's State Department, worked with one of his closest aides, Karen Hughes, when she was doing that public diplomacy to reach out to Muslims. How do you know him?
Well, kind of in the interfaith work that we've been doing over the last decade. I was one of the readers of his book, What's Right with Islam, a new vision of Muslims in America. We were in Australia recently, the World Parliament of World Religions. You know, in the interfaith world, there aren't that many people working at the cutting edge of interfaith. This is what's so crazy about this story. Imam Faisal has been at the cutting edge of whatever we mean by moderate Islam, and those words weren't even used until very, very recently. This is a guy who well before 9/11, he had two books that are very, very important, Islam, The Search for Meaning, and Islam, A Sacred Law. These are things that people need to read. And it's so easy to take one comment out of context. Any of us who've been in the media, any one of us who've been interviewed, you can take a statement and turn someone into a radical and turn someone into a terrorist. This guy has been at the highest echelons, State Department, FBI. He has spoken in the Aspen Institute. He's spoken in Washington Cathedral. This is, I mean, it's really crazy, and that's another part of the story that's very scary. I mean, the community board, before anything, voted this 15-0. There was an amazing conversation. In fact, there was a request of Daisy Khan, could you put a 9/11 memorial inside of what is now Park 51? And he said, of course, we're planning on doing that. And this got stoked by a very small group of people. And then what I would say is an irresponsible national leadership, whether it's Gingrich and Palin and then a certain element of the media. And what's very scary is what was a local issue that was a non-issue. This is a group of people led by Imam Faisal that has been 10 blocks from there for the last 27 years. This is a complete non-issue. And so what it really says is what's going on in America.
I mean, what's very interesting, as Nate Silver points out, a well-known pollster, the plurality of Manhattanites are actually for this.
Even now.
Even now.
Right.
With the swirl of negative publicity. You also have the issue of conservatives attacking, and yet you have, who are very concerned about states' rights. This went through this long process. Among them, the Landmarks Commission said they're not going to make this a landmark, this building, that it could be rebuilt. Can you talk about what it means for conservatives to talk about Imam Faisal as a secret radical?
Well, I think what happens in a hyper kind of 24/7 media is, as soon as words like radical, as soon as words like extremist come out, they have a life of their own. And because we're on a tinderbox right now in the country altogether, when you have 20% of Americans unemployed, or even off, they're not even looking for employment anymore, you have so many Americans in very, very serious pain, when you have so much change happening in a country, sociological and cultural change and religious change, and when you have so much going on, there's a kind of tinderbox, and there's a lot of fear and a lot of anger, and it calls for incredibly mature leadership, by the way, political leadership and religious leadership. And it's so easy to stoke those fears for political capital, and that's what we have. So you put out the word terrorism and extremists, and it's attached to him forever, forever.
I want to bring in Professor John Esposito into the conversation. He's the University Professor of Religion and International Affairs at Georgetown University and is author of several books. Most recent is The Future of Islam. Professor Esposito, I want to play a clip for you. It's the proposed Islamic Center near Ground Zero has generated a flood of absurd comparisons from the right, including Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich.
Those folks don't have any interest in reaching out to the community. They're trying to make a case about supremacy. That's why they won't go anywhere else. That's why they won't accept any other offer. And I think we ought to be honest about the fact that we have a right, and this happens all the time in America. Nazis don't have the right to put up a sign next to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. We would never accept the Japanese putting up a site next to Pearl Harbor. There's no reason for us to accept a mosque next to the World Trade Center.
Let me ask you, what would happen, do you think, if the Ku Klux Klan wanted to establish a memorial at Gettysburg?
Well, I don't know. Nothing's happening in Lower Manhattan.
What do you mean you don't know? They wouldn't get to first base. Nobody would put up at the Klan building a memorial anywhere, much less Gettysburg.
Well, you're right there, but where is the public outrage? If we don't have it for Lower Manhattan,
the public outrage is there. You're just not seeing a march in the street.
That was